Hi guys, this is Mr. Tan, and today we're looking at international marketing, and we're focusing on P7 of the Pearson specification. Obviously we're going to cover an introduction into the questions, looking at the key words in the questions, and then trying to break down and understand what the question is looking for. We'll be looking at different market orientation approaches, looking at different examples and organizational structures to those approaches, and then looking at the implications and effects of these. So the first question says, explain and analyze the various international marketing approaches organizations can adopt. So if we look at first the keywords in the question, we can see that the keywords are to explain and analyze. Analyze basically means to go into more detail. So you must not write bullet points. You have to elaborate and go into more detail, and if possible give company examples. And the word analyze means to state how one factor affects another. So for instance, if you took a domestic marketing orientated approach, what does that mean and how does that affect the company? Or if you adopted a specific approach, how does that affect the company? So how does one factor affect another? Okay, so the next point in this question, we need to understand, what do we actually mean by marketing approaches organizations can adopt? So that was a little bit confusing. So what we normally do is we go back to the Pearson specification and we look what they are looking for. So if we look at the Pearson specification, Unit 40 for international marketing, we can see that Pearson's are saying what are the different organizational structures in an international context, and they're also talking about home or international orientation and reporting lines. So so we're going to be focusing on the different types of organizational structures linked to the orientation type approaches, being domestic, multi-domestic or global marketing orientation approaches. A suggested layout would be, a brief introduction on what we mean by globalization as opposed to internationalization, which we covered in P1 and P2 of international marketing. A quick recap on the different, orientation types, including domestic, multi-domestic and global market orientation type approaches. And then provide examples, discuss the different approaches going international in terms of organizational structures. Then to use examples when you're actually going through these to show analysis. Well, what's the implications of doing this as opposed to that? And then providing your conclusions. What is it that you think companies should do? So, why is it so important in terms of organizational structure? It's so important because if you go into another country and you want to set up, depending upon how you set up, would depend upon the degree of risk which you take. If you're going, full board ahead and full investment into offices and staff and retail stores, well, then you're going to incur a lot of, expenses and setup costs before you've actually made any sales. So obviously the risks are going to be higher, but when the risks are higher, there are the potential of increased sales and economies of scale, and so gaining competitive advantage through more sales and lower cost of goods. So let's go back on to what we mean by domestic, multi-domestic and global market orientation type approaches. So the domestic market is really, your domestic market is the most important market for you. It's where you focus all your sales predominantly, but at the same time you may be getting sales from international markets, and here you see this as sales extension. The international operations are secondary to the domestic market. The market excess domestic production, foreign sales seen as a profitable extension, but the orientation still remains domestic. I can remember for the first company I worked for, it was a company called Metro Products, and their main focus was the domestic market. They were selling car accessory products mechanical steering wheel devices, and they were doing very, very well, and they were expanding in the UK market. They had a production line and kind of manufacturing site where they brought the components in, and they put all the components together in the UK, and then they distributed it to their A1 Motor Stores, Motor Worlds, Argus, and Halfords, and so on and so forth in the UK. But they were getting a lot of interest from the success of their product and the quality of their product from other international markets, from Germany, from France, even from the USA. So they were getting interest, and they didn't want to lose out on that. So they employed an international manager to look after these marketplaces and to try and develop sales from the leads that they were getting. But all the functions and were still, from a domestic perspective, decision making was a centralized, domestic orientated approach, and the support that was given to the international department was secondary to the domestic side of things. So the main emphasis is on the domestic marketplace. The next type is the multi-domestic marketing orientated approach, where the company recognizes the importance of shared business to the company. So subsidiaries operate independent of one another in establishing objectives and plans for those marketplaces. So here now, companies start to invest more into these international marketplaces. Decision making may be centralized or decentralized, and also you may have still core functions being domestically supported, the international division, but you can also now have the international division having their own core functional areas similar to the domestic market. So here the international markets are actually seen as being as equally important to the company as well as the domestic market, and so they plow more investment into these other countries that they see potential growth to extend their product lines. And then we have the global market orientation approach, where companies from this perspective sees consumers in all the countries as being the same. This is very applicable to products which are standardized and seem very similar. Products like Apple, which are marketed across the whole world as the same product with the same brand. Products like Coca-Cola, best suited for standardized products with little differentiation, and assuming that all consumers in all the countries are the same. Okay, now we have organizations in international marketplaces, which I'd like you to watch this video. So if you download Zapworks from Google onto your mobile and then open the app up, put your phone over this barcode, and then there'll be 3 videos on there, and I would like you to click on the first video to watch this video on organizations in international markets, and this will take about 14 minutes. So please do that for me when you have the time. So if we now look at some of the different organizational structures, we can see this one is a functional corporate structure where you've got domestic corporate staff orientation with a pre-international division. So this approach, you've got the president, corporate staff, and then the different departments or functions: marketing, manufacturing, research, finance, planning, and personnel. And then you have a foreign subsidiary, and the foreign subsidiary would then look after the different countries. But the foreign subsidiary reports back to the domestic marketplace, so it's a centralized decision making. The foreign subsidiary doesn't make the decisions themselves and setting their own objectives. It's done from the domestic market, from a centralized place, and the foreign subsidiaries are supported by the domestic market functions. They don't have their own functional departments to support them. So again, this type of orientation approach is very similar to a domestic market orientation approach, where the focus is on the domestic market, but potential sales in the other international markets the company does not want to lose. So it's seen as a secondary function to the company as such. What are the pros and cons of these? Well, the pros and cons of these are such that you're actually limiting the risk in terms of investing too much money into other countries when you're not sure in terms of how it may or may not go. We've seen companies like Tesco's. They invested £2 billion into the US, trying to compete with Walmart, not being able to compete with Walmart and not getting it quite right in terms of the food portion sizes, and as a consequence they couldn't compete and they had to pull out of the US, losing £2 billion. So again, we can see the consequences of not in terms of going from a global perspective, and the consequences are, you can, if you invest too much too quickly in another country, you could run the risk of it not working and then losing all that amount of money. So it is a risk. Okay, this way, from a domestic marketing orientation approach, is more of a gradual incremental growth in terms of looking at different countries, which are first giving you the leads, saying that people are interested, and then kind of testing out those marketplaces. If we look at another approach, again, a domestic marketing orientated approach. You have your president, corporate staff, and then the different functions being, again, marketing, manufacturing, research, finance, planning, and personnel. And then you have your line management from corporate staff, and then you have the different divisions within a domestic market, division A, B, C, and D. And then you have the international division. So the international division is seen as just another division from the home market, but into different countries. So in the same way, the international division into different country subsidiaries are supported by the functional departments from the domestic market. Again, centralized decision making, divisional corporate structure, domestically orientated corporate staff, domestically orientated product divisions, international division. So again, the main focus here is the domestic marketing orientated approach, where the international division is like an extension of the domestic marketplace. And again, it allows for capitalizing on sales that can come from different international marketplaces and being cautious, which means that if things don't work out, then in a way, you may not lose as much money if invested too much and things didn't work out. But on the other side of the coin, you run the risk of other people going full steam ahead and investing into and set up costs into another country, and really taking on more market share than you would normally take, because you've gone on with a very slow approach, a domestic marketing oriented approach. Then we look at this next one, which is a divisional corporate structure, domestically orientated corporate staff, international. And here we see that you have your corporate staff, your president, your corporate staff. You have your other functional areas, marketing, manufacturing, research, finance, planning, and personnel. And then from your corporate staff, you have your line management. And then you have the different divisions, A, B, C, D. But then you have the international division. Now, the international division definitely is reporting back to the line management. So you've got centralized decision making process. And again, the international division is supported by the functional departments from the domestic market. But more investment is actually going into this now, because now you can see the area managers in different continents, in Europe, Latin America, Middle and Far East. And then you have area staff, from those different continents. And then you have the different country subsidiaries in that continent. So here we're seeing more investment. So now the international divisions, even though it's centralized decision making and being supported by the domestic functional departments, we see more investment and more importance being placed to putting more people into these countries, which is going to cost more in terms of offices, in terms of staff, in terms of IT, in terms of the whole setup of all these staff working in these other countries. So again, this type of approach is very similar to a multi-domestic marketing orientated approach, where the importance is now given to international markets and they're seen as being equally important to the domestic market. If we take another approach here, we can see the international divisional structure. But here they have their own international staff. So if we look at this, we can see you've got your president, corporate staff. Again, your functional departments: marketing, manufacturing, research, finance, planning, and personnel. You have your vice president of the international division, and then your international division staff. And then your international division staff, you have functional areas which are supporting the international marketplaces, and then you have your different country subsidiaries. But here, the key difference here again is the functional departments being set up in the international marketplaces, which you see is a duplication, because now you've got marketing in international markets, marketing in the domestic market, manufacturing in the international, manufacturing in the domestic. So in one way, it's seen here, we can clearly see this is a multi domestic marketing orientation approach, where the international markets are seen as equally as important as the domestic marketplace. And we can see the importance and the amount of finance and structure that the company is actually putting in to the international division to try and take sales further. So and again, this kind of communicates more decentralized decision making, where the vice president of an international division will probably be making decisions from their international division staff and the different country subsidiaries, and reporting back to the domestic corporate staff president. If we look at Apple, Apple itself can be viewed as a global marketing orientated company. The approach that they adopt, and they are all over the world. Okay, I mean, and their approach, we can see, is characterized by a standardized product, and they see all the consumers as the same, and their organizational structures are actually quite complex to a degree, a bit like Samsung. Again, I'd like you to watch this video, so if you haven't done already, please download ZapWorks onto your mobile, and then open up the ZapWorks on your mobile, place your mobile over the barcode, and then the barcode would come up with various videos I would want you to watch, and this will be the second video on Steve Jobs' power structure. Very good, nice interview. So if we look at Apple, we can see that Tim Cook is currently at the center of Apple, and you have his vice principals, senior vice principals surrounding him. Now this is kind of like a spoke wheel hierarchical structure at the top of Apple's command center. So a spoke wheel hierarchical type structure, and the beauty about this structure is that the VPs and SVPs all report in to Tim Cook, the CEO, and as well as reporting into each other, they also communicate to each other, which is really good, because if you have a new product that is being launched, a new feature or functionality on the Apple phone, and you've got your software department, well, you want to make sure that the software is applicable and works with the hardware. So because if it doesn't, then you're going to get products which don't work because the software doesn't fit with the hardware, and then you're going to get reputation which is going to be damaged, and so on and so forth. So this type of organizational structure does work very, very effectively for Apple, having a spoke wheel hierarchical structure at the top of their organizational company. But equally, when you go down the organizational structure, in the middle structure you have the functional hierarchical type structure by product. So product departments. You have Apple's executive team at the center of this spoke wheel hierarchical structure. In the middle management, you will have middle management, and you'd have the split by different product lines, and these product lines would then be supported by the different functional departments. And then you would have a duplication of departments, each supporting these product lines: iPads, iPhones, MacBooks, iTunes, and so on and so forth. Now, if we look at Apple International, we can see you've got Apple International. It's Apple Operations Europe, Apple Operations, Apple Distribution International, Apple Sales Ireland, Apple Retail Europe Holding, and Apple Sales International from Europe, Apple Operations Europe. If we look at Apple's offshore organizational structure, again, from their, Apple's Operations International, you've got Apple's Operations Europe, Apple Distribution International, Apple Retail Holdings. You also have, Apple Asia, in-country distributors, Apple Sales International. So you have a fairly complex type of structure, a complex structure which is taken from a global perspective. And this global perspective is that they see their sales being quite standard and the customers being all the same, and therefore would want these products, so they don't have to modify it. And they gain economies of scale by targeting a global marketplace. And so this global marketplace, the sales that they get is represented by their billions which they turn over every single year annually, and they've been increasing year on year. They manufacture their products in China, and due to their economies of scale and cheap labor costs and various total quality management principles, their phones cost them approximately £20 per mobile phone to manufacture, and yet it is sold for nearly £900 to £1,000. So we can see the amount of profits and why they're actually making these profits. So Apple's organizational global structure is right for them, and is right because by taking this approach and taking this investment and having this type of organization from a global orientated approach, they are turning over billions of pounds in net profits. Equally, if we look at Samsung has a very, very complex international global orientated approach. In comparison to Samsung's product range is a lot wider. Apple's product range is smaller, but Samsung has over 1,000 different product lines. So again, their organizational structure is really combined in a global perspective, and their organizational structure is very, very complex. To see the power structure from Samsung, again, if you haven't got the ZapWorks, download it from Google, put it on your mobile, click on it, and then put your phone over the barcode and watch that small video, about 5 minutes long, on the Samsung power structure. Another example of the organizational structure can be seen with Coca-Cola. And if we look at Coca-Cola, we can see that they have a standardized product, and they see customers and consumers around the world as being the same. They have their headquarters, commercial, strategic planning, corporate governance, change management, manufacturing and research, innovations, their supply chain, plan and integration, procurement, quality and risk management, delivery management, and finance from the domestic market side. And then they have their international division, and from their international division they have their marketing, manufacturing and research, administration, finance, sales, supply chain, and then they have area managers for different plants in Europe, Africa, North and South America, Middle and Far East. So we can see the global marketing orientation approach. We can see the amount of profits that they turn up by adopting this approach, and this is really the analysis in terms of going global and getting it right and getting the marketing right and standardized products will lead you with billions in profits, which then gives you a competitive advantage to be able to use this money to reinvest into new product lines, to use this money to satisfy shareholders, to use this money to to market yourself and maintain your market share in those countries. So the economies of scale and the sales and the increase of sales and a lower cost of goods sold gives you greater gross profit margins and gross profit percentage margins. And if you maintain your costs, so you're not increasing your overall costs, then you're going to have higher net profit percentages. So we can see the success of this company and the reason for doing it, or taking a global marketing orientated approach. But as we say, there is always a degree of risk, and nothing is for sure by marketing your products in one country or another. So there is a degree of risk in setting up investment from a global perspective. Now, if we look at finally, we've looked at the key words and questions. Key words being to explain, to go into more detail, and to analyze how one factor affects another. We looked at what we meant by the different approaches. The different approaches according to the Pearson specification, meaning the different organizational structures when you go into different international markets. But bearing in mind, Pearson's were also talking about different orientations. So again, linked to a domestic orientation approach, a multi-domestic orientation approach, or a global market orientation approach. We provided a suggested layout. Again, it's only a suggested layout, you don't need to follow it as long as you answer the question. We've covered the different orientation types, a domestic marketing orientation approach, a multi-domestic and a global market orientation approach. We looked at different examples of organizational structures and orientations, in terms of a domestic, multi-domestic and global market orientation approaches, using Samsung, using Apple, and using Coca-Cola. And then throughout, we've tried to make some inferences and some analysis in terms of the key benefits and risks of going domestic, multi-domestic or global. So I hope that has been helpful in terms of trying to answer this question today from Mr. Tan. Many thanks.